It's up to you, buddy.
Good evening, everybody. It is May 13th, 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Looks like we're missing the mayor. Anyone else down there that I can't see behind the projector? No.
Councillor Mullen.
Councillor
is
Mullen.
gone.
Okay.
And Mr. Kingsley is unable to make it.
All right. Anyone like to approve the minutes from the May 6th meeting or make a motion or discussion? Okay, so moved. Want to vote on that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, okay. So go ahead and open the public hearing. Oregon Revised Statutes 221.770 requires 2 public hearings be held to hear from citizens regarding the use of state revenue sharing funds distributed to the city of Stayton. The purpose of this hearing is to hear public testimony on the proposed use of funds. So before that, we'll go ahead and receive the staff report.
Good evening, Budget Committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to address you with respect to the uses, the amounts and the uses of state revenue sharing. My name is Andy Parks. I'm the city's financial consultant. There's 4 major revenue sources in the city's budget that are subject to this state revenue sharing: the cigarette tax, liquor tax, and the state gas tax. Right button. There we go. And the amounts, the fund that those are in is listed in this the slide, as well as the amount and the percentage of the total budget and the uses. So in the general fund, it's basically going towards public safety, police, and then general purposes. And the state gas tax is restricted in its use to the street maintenance and the street fund. So total is a little over $816,000, and the total budget is $24 million. So that's a little over 3 1/3%. Be glad to address any questions you may have.
Does anyone have questions for Mr. Parks? Okay. Can we go ahead and proceed? Okay. So we're going to move on to general testimony. Okay, so I'll now open the public hearing. If there is anyone that would like to provide testimony regarding proposed uses of state revenue sharing, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Judy Money, and I live at 2110 East Pine Street. And I'm wearing 2 hats this evening, one for RDS, which is the revitalized downtown Stayton, and one as a citizen of Stayton. Right now, my hat is RDS. And the RDS board approved that I come before you and convey the following. We would like to thank the city of Stayton, Keith Campbell, our city manager, Dan Fleshman, the planning director, and Lance Ludwig, Public Works Director, for helping RDS accomplish the following projects by allocating funding from the CDBG money dollars. Address numbers on downtown buildings, benches in the historic downtown, street sign toppers designating historic downtown, wayfinding signs, one of which has been installed at 3rd and Washington, and more that are still in progress for First Avenue this fiscal year. I even saw the city crews out helping John Money and Steve Poison this year set up the parklet downtown in the rain. The new parklet was also funded by CDBG dollars. And I'm here to say thank you very much for being able to make this happen for the city and our community. Now, my citizen hat. I was going to wear a red hat, but I didn't want to be laughed at maybe. I fully understand how challenging it is to decide what should and should not be in your budget for the new year. I was a city commissioner in Three Rivers, Michigan for several terms, a city about the size of Stayton. So I can relate, and it is not an easy task. The city of Stayton has received $400,000 from the state for the CDBG program, a 2-year program, half of which was budgeted in fiscal year 2018-19. The allocation will be completed in fiscal year 2019-20, with $200,000 left for this fiscal year. The council decides how it is spent. In the proposed budget, there is $24,000 allocated for the neighborhood grant program. I believe this significantly underfunds the community's need. There are several organizations that provide valuable services to our citizens in areas that supplement the basic services that are provided by the city. Organizations from the Historical Society to the Santiam Youth Sports, from the Brown House to RDS, and the Teen Center. Services that create pride and identity. Services that make Stayton our hometown. Just I propose that $50,000 be allocated to the neighborhood grant program. I also propose some of the city street fund should be prioritized for street improvements in downtown. Our sidewalks and streets in downtown reflect on how we care for our city, and they are overdue for many safety repairs. So $50,000 for the neighborhood grant program and some of the city street fund for street improvements in downtown. And I thank you for your service and for taking citizen input. And I have folders for everybody. May I give those to Alyssa?
Go ahead. Thank you, Judy. Are any other citizens wishing to speak?
Good evening. My name is Wendy Stone. I live at 525 North Myrtle Avenue in Stayton. I'm here representing the Santiam Heritage Foundation, also known as the Brown House Event Center. As you may know, we are going through a transition from restoration, which is nearly done, yay, to local historic education. We are currently involved in a change of use process with the city, and this provides us with new challenges. The allocation for community development block grants in this budget, as it is proposed, is insufficient for the needs of our area, in my opinion. Of the nearly 50 local clubs and organizations who might apply for a CDBG, 20,000, and I may have misread something, Ms. Money said 24, so I may have missed something. I saw 20,000, would not go very far. If each of those organizations applied and the council chose to fund every group equitably, that would amount to only $400 for each organization. Stayton received $400,000 from the state of Oregon for the CDBG program, which was a 2-year program. Half of that was budgeted in the last fiscal year, with $200,000 left for this fiscal year. In the proposed budget, there is $20,000 allocated for the neighborhood grant program. Again, I may have missed something since Ms. Mahoney said $24,000. Now, $4,000 isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. That is a small percent of the funds available. I believe this significantly underfunds our community's need. Santiam Heritage Foundation has been fortunate to receive a city grant in previous years, and we have been grateful for that. However, the $1,000 received is frankly less than 10% of our annual budget, and that's just to keep the lights and heat on and water available to the house. It does nothing toward funding either the restoration that's nearly done or the community education programs that we're moving toward. I would encourage this budget committee to increase the Community Development Block Grants Fund for everyone's sake. Double or even triple the amount proposed would come much closer to adequately supporting the area's historical, arts, and cultural groups who do so much to make Stayton the place where people want to live and raise a family. On page 5 of the city manager's budget message, Mr. Campbell stated, quote, "This budget should define the values of our community. This budget should be the narrative and the reflection of the values of our community, where we as a community are spending our time, energy, and resources." I support Mr. Campbell's statements about our community's values, and I encourage this committee to step up and increase the community development block grants to address the actual needs. The last issue I'd like to bring to your attention is the fact that in the salary schedule, the city manager's annual minimum and maximum salary reads, quote, "established by contract." I would draw your attention to the manager's, quote, "thank you," unquote, portion of his summary, and I encourage the committee to take to heart his words, quote, "We have an obligation to the stakeholders of our community to be as open and as transparent as we can in this budgeting process, and to make the work product accessible to everyone in our community," unquote. I'd note that the city manager reports to the mayor and city council, who report to the citizens. I don't believe it is too much to ask to have a minimum and maximum salary range shown for this position, as well as the rest of our hardworking city employees. Thank you for your time and service. I also have handouts, but I didn't get them in anything fancy like Judy did.
I'm an artist.
Yeah, you are.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Do any other citizens wish to speak? Okay. Okay, there being no further public testimony, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. Moving on to budget overview. Mr. Parks again.
Thank you. And just, this is just a broad overview of the overall budget document, and then you'll have the department heads getting into their specific departmental presentations following this. You'll find in the proposed budget, a comprehensive, funding to address council goals and priorities, including, economic development strategy implementation. This year you funded, a study that is wrapping up, and next year, will be the implementation of those strategies. You have a citywide facility needs assessment that was budgeted $25,000 for a city hall type of facility this year, and that's been elevated up in terms of a more comprehensive look at facility needs. There's funding for emergency management that you'll find in the non-operational side of things. There's money moving forward on the utility master plans and park master plans, money for a search for a secondary water source, expanding the community and neighborhood grant programs. I do want to comment a little bit here. The prior budget was actually $5,000 for community grants. This is a quadrupling effectively from 5 to 20, and then there's a 4,000 set aside to get to the 24. So going from 5 to 20 is a quadrupling of the budget. The community development block grant monies are not at all used for this particular purpose and have no ability to be used in that direction. They're set aside by the grant that was already approved for $400,000, and the spend down is occurring this year, and then the balance of the spend down is going to occur in this upcoming fiscal year. There'll be a development of communications and branding that is funded in the budget as well. And then moving forward with establishing guidelines and expectations that relate to the revitalization efforts for downtown Stayton. We continue to work on enhancing the framework within the budget document for making decisions, not just now, but how those decisions you make today impact things longer term. So continue to expand on the 5-year plan, looking at the capital improvement obligations and needs, as well as the operating costs for those. Your total budget is $24,149,549. That's down from a little over $26 million last year. Your beginning balance, fund balance, and ending fund balance are nearly the same, a little over $10 million to start and $10 to finish. It's a $14 million spending plan, $11.5 million net of internal transfers from one fund to another fund to pay for cost of services and just moving some other dollars around to accomplish certain things. And again, it's establishing that foundation for multi-year planning with the infrastructure, the facilities that you're looking at, and then taking care of your vehicle replacement and so forth, and then the downtown planning efforts. On the resource side, this is excluding transfers. You can see the two primary sources of money are your your charges for services and your property taxes. And then intergovernmental after that, franchise fees, and then miscellaneous, and the permits are very low. There are no debt proceeds presented in this year. You just don't have the capital programs planned this particular year as you did last year. So $11.3 million total new money into the city is what's anticipated. As it relates to property taxes, the city has a $32.8 tax rate. This budget includes levying the full amount. A 60-cent special levy rate approved by voters. This includes levying the full amount of that. And the budget anticipates about a 3.7% increase in your taxable assessed value, which leads to your overall levy. The city's recognized about 0.5% in population growth. And there's some incremental rate adjustments we've talked about in the past, sewer, storm, and street. The CPI is 1.9% for the same period that we used last year, which is a end of March time frame. The water, we talked to the council earlier about somewhere in the neighborhood of a 5% increase annually for several years. We've moved some things around on the capital side that allow that we think to be able to be at a 4.5% rate. And then as we looked at the overall utility bill, water being a part of the bill that includes sewer and storm and street, the overall bill goes up depending on consumption of water from around 2.6% to 3%. Systems development charges, we've included an inflationary adjustment in the budget numbers of 3%. You're going to see a number of 2%, which is probably closer to the real number, but it's a revenue number, and that fee will be adjusted whatever that ENR inflation index is after the end of May. On the expenditure side of things, you've got a little over $5 million for personnel. That includes salaries and benefits. Materials and services, a little over $4 million. Capital outlay, $955,000. And then debt service, $1.2 million for a total of $11,500,000. And again, this excludes interfund transfers. Personnel-wise, on a citywide basis, you're seeing a net reduction of 0.4 FTEs. It's really a point or one FTE. There's some accounting change that we did with the library that was grant funded, that we've just grossed that up to get it to be consistent with everything else in the budget. There's a 1 FTE reduction in the police department that you'll hear about. But compensation assumptions include, a 2% COLA, approximately a 5% increase in the PERS contribution rate for police, which is the only department with PERS. ASME includes a 2% COLA, and then management non-represented a 2% COLA. We are looking at a 5% approximate increase, on health insurance. Last year, recall, we invested around $410,000 in a unfunded actuarial liability contribution to the city's own retirement plan. That was made. That is not shown. It's not a repetitive thing, so it was a one-time deal. But there is this need to move forward with some sort of funding towards the PERS unfunded liability, which is just about $2 million at the end of December 2017, and the $250,000 investment makes some progress, on that front. A few benchmark type things to keep in mind here. 2016, your debt per capita was a little over $2,100. At the, for 2020, that number will be reducing to $1,884. Your debt coverage ratios, this gives you, you have many debt covenants that require that they meet a certain ratio. Generally, that's in the 1.25 range if you're doing lending with a bank or something like that. You have a few loans with federal, state agencies that let that be a little bit less. But water is, was not a good number for 19. That has a lot to do with the UAL contribution. But it's going back up and getting yourself into position to be able to issue debt next year. Sewer and storm are both at a kind of a minimum level, which leads, as you look at debt capacity down at the bottom of the screen, you've got some ability to issue debt in water, which is getting close to the number needed. Sewer and storm, there's some challenges if you needed to issue debt there. On the capital side, you can see the vast majority of the money, close to $500,000 is going into streets. The other funds, well, the next highest is sewer, and that's a planning effort. The other funds are buying some equipment and moving forward on some smaller type items. But you can see the total for fiscal year 20 is well below the fiscal year 19 number of $3.5 million. So there's some planning that is ultimately going on here, as well as moving forward on your street side of things. In terms of your ability to pay for this capital, the city's wrapping up the street transportation system plan here in this fiscal year. That'll help identify how many dollars are needed annually, on the street side of things. But your capacity on a continual basis, based on how the budget is currently laid out, is a little over $400,000. With a nice amount of money being used for street maintenance. Parks is an undetermined amount. Still without a master plan. And then the water and sewer, you can see those, and then stormwater, again, needs a master plan to really, focus in on what that need is, and then you can see the capacity on the right. Just, I'll slip through these slides pretty quickly. These are slides I think most of you have seen, been with the committee a while. This shows where Stayton sits relative to other communities in the state of Oregon. There's 96 different entities here on water costs, and Stayton is this black line here. excuse me, it's the blue line. And this black line is the average. So you can see you have a high fixed cost, and then as you use water, which most people use 4,000 gallons, or this is in CCS, most customers using this or more. So the more water you use in Stayton, the better deal you're ultimately getting. That's what this is showing us. On the commercial, 2-inch commercial side, you're seeing the same thing. You're about at the average fixed rate, and then your consumption rate is well below the average. Wastewater, you have a fixed rate, you're high, and then you have a break even outwards of 10 plus CCF. So overall in sewer, you are high relative to the rest of the state. And then stormwater, excuse me, this is the commercial on sewer things. The average, you're higher on the commercial side. And then stormwater, you're low on residential, well below the average. And then on storm, same thing on the commercial side of things, you're lower. And then on the street fee, you're down at the minimum, and the average being upwards of $6 per month. And City of Stayton's $2.04 with the proposed budget. So just kind of summarize all that. For residential and commercial customers on 3 of the 4 utilities, water, storm, and street, you're below the average on both the residential and commercial side, and then your sewer rates on both elements are on the higher side. And again, just touch on those rate increases that are proposed, 4.5 on water and 1.9 the CPI on the other 3. That, high-level overview of on a citywide basis, and if you want to address any questions on that, we can, and, before moving into the general fund resources.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Parks before we continue? Councilor Hook?
Thank you, Chair Patty. Andy, I have a question about the water and the utility bill increases in general over next year. Am I understanding that we're talking about a 6.4% increase?
No, it would be a 4.5% increase on water.
But then there was 1.9% underneath that number.
Right. So the water portion of the bill would go up 4.5%. Mm-hmm. The sewer, the street, and the storm, those components would go up by 1.9.
Can you explain that in average cost, like how much that's going to be adding to someone's bill per month?
Sure. If it's a $100 bill, what we've calculated out is it would be between 2.6% and 3%. So it'd be
$2 or $3 per month.
$2.60 or to $3 per month extra.
And it would go up just one time that year
Yes.
per month? It's not that it's going to be $2 or $3 increase each month throughout the year?
It'll go up just one-time increase, July or August.
Okay.
And then that would be the increase for the entire year until next year comes along.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Parks?
Chair Patty?
All right. Yes,
Sorry.
go ahead, Councilor Hook.
Just a point of clarification. What is this kind of an increase? What does it look like compared to what other cities are doing around the state? Because it doesn't seem like a big increase, but at the same time, I kind of want some context on what that looks like.
Sure. I think, around the state, sewer rates, water rates, communities are having to deal with, on the sewer side of things, dealing with treatment type issues are going to see rate increases well above the inflation rate. And so the inflation rate right now is 1.9%. So generally, you're going to see incremental rates of around 1.9% on utilities. Where you find cities having to go up by more than that, they've either deferred rate increases, much like Stayton has over the years on several of these utilities, particularly water. But other than that, I don't see much beyond inflationary increases happening. So yeah, I think what you have within Stayton is a little bit more overall, a little bit more than a cost of living type of rate increase. Does that
Yeah,
answer your question?
and so are you saying that we haven't really done a lot of rate increases in the past years? Is that what I'm understanding?
There was a period of time, several years, around 7 to 8 years, from 2008, 2009 through 2015, 16, that the city didn't raise rates on any of its utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent question. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Mr. Parks before he continues?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Cranston.
Oh, it's on already.
For next year, can you, if we do rate increases next year, can you add that line into the graph so we can kind of see where that would place us on that graph?
Yes, I'll be updating all of these slides to see exactly where community stands relative to the market.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, like, if we do another rate increase, say this is where we're at, this is where our proposed line would be.
Yes.
So that way we can
Okay.
have that actual visual of where it'll be. If it's too hard, you can say no. But
Yeah, the tool I've got, it's really easy. So, glad to do that.
Okay, does anyone else have questions? All right, I have one. Oh, go ahead. Councilor Ort, sorry.
Thank you. So with the increase that you're proposing for this year, so how often should we be increasing, or so we do our budget next year, and then what does that look like in terms of future rate increases, and how often?
That's a great question, and what we did a few years ago with the council is adopt a set of fiscal policies which calls for an annual review of the rates and calls for incremental rates increases as opposed to big jumps in rates. And utilizing 5-year financial planning tools, as well as getting your master plans updated to where they reflect the more realistic situation within the community, should be able to help the community lay out incremental rate adjustments rather than steep one-time type of adjustments that cause lots of chaos. So the intent from the fiscal policies is to incrementally adjust rates, recognizing there's inflationary costs for personnel, materials and services, as well as additional building costs for items, and maintaining appropriate reserves and building up dollars and planning to borrow, doing all those things in a comprehensive fashion, and not letting things get to a point where it requires a 20-30% rate increase, maybe not one time or 2 times, but maybe even as many as 3 types of increases like that create a lot of chaos within a community.
Thank you.
So the one question that I was going to ask you is, I thought I heard you say something about the commercial water rate usage being slightly higher than the average. Did I catch that correctly?
I think I may have misspoke. So
Okay.
this is on the wastewater utility. And on wastewater, that's the one utility where Stayton is higher than the other comparable municipalities in the state. If we looked at water utility, you can see you're at the average basically for the fixed cost, and then your consumption rate is well below.
And that's residential and commercial, or just
That's the commercial side,
Okay.
and you see the same phenomenon
Okay,
on the residential side.
excellent. All right, thank you. Does anyone else have
Do you
questions
have a
for Mr.
question?
Parks?
Yes.
Go ahead,
So
Councilor Ort.
does this rate increase, thank you, does this rate increase include the commercial, or is it just for residential?
It's comprehensive, includes all rate classes, and the city needs a rate study once they go through the water master planning process that will, I think, simplify the current rate structure, which is a little convoluted and a little difficult.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and allow Mr. Parks to continue.
Thank you. So this will just open up share with you, what the general fund resources are, and then the departments will speak to their needs to consume these dollars. You have about $5.8 million worth of total money in the general fund this year, with $1.3 million of that in beginning fund balance. That's a slight decrease from the prior year. Recognize one of the things in the proposed budget, you'll see an estimated funding of a transfer from the general fund to a pension stability fund in the current year of $150,000, and this is made up of savings out of the police department budget for the year and moving the dollars now versus waiting to next year. And it's, from an accounting perspective, it's just to make sure that we're adhering to the fiscal policies, and moving the dollars into next year, you kind of run into a bump that doesn't make the fiscal policy work. And so rather than have that thing happen, we can move the money this year and be within policy. Taxes, again, you got a 3.8% increase in the projected levy. The levy rate is the full amount, and this does include state and local marijuana taxes in that total. Your franchise fees, a little bit over the current year estimate. Most of that is in the area of solid waste franchise fee. Your intergovernmental, this number is down from last year by around $200,000, and that's because last year we budgeted the full $400,000 receipt of CDBG monies, and you're only going to get around $200,000, and then the other $200,000 again is budgeted, effectively a duplicated budget into the proposed budget for fiscal '20. But if you look at them year over year, they're basically flat. License and permits, charges for services are very small, minor little adjustments, and then miscellaneous is down a little bit related to some dollars that just come in occasionally, and it's primarily in the area of insurance proceeds and so forth. Transfers are down. There was $70,000 that came in one-time money from the vehicle replacement fund for the UAL money last year that doesn't recur. So that ends up again with $5.8 million. Glad to address any questions you may have on resources.
Counselor Hook, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Patty. Andy, I have a question, and maybe we'll get to the line items later, or is now an okay time to just ask a question about the general fund?
Yeah, now's as good as any.
Okay. I see that there's a proposed $7,500 for counselor/mayor stipends. I'm curious about what that is and why that's there and it wasn't there before.
I think my suggestion would be to deal with that question when we get to that part of the budget.
Perfect.
And do with the resources. I can, answer your questions on resources, and then that item or that discussion will come up in as part
Great.
of, I think, Keith's budget presentation.
Thank you.
I was also interested in that. Thank you. Anyone else have questions before we continue? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and proceed. Do we want to turn it over to the management team, or do you have more for us, Mr. Parks?
That's it.
Great.
It's on to the other-
Okay. Looks like Chief Stevens is up first. Okay, Chief Stevens, you go ahead and start us off here with the police department.
Okay. Mayor, Council, and Budget Committee members, your Stayton Police Department is a full-service, 24 hours a day police department where our mission is to positively impact the livability of Stayton through public safety. We are soon to be staffed with 12 certified officers and 2.5 civilian employees, as we have just recently made a conditional offer to a new officer. The 12 officers are made up of the police chief, a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, and 8 patrol officers. One of the patrol officers takes on the role of detective when staffing allows. One of the officers is trained and is assigned to our drug canine handler as our drug canine handler with Brody. Another officer is also assigned to be on the motorcycle and addresses traffic safety issues through traffic assessment, education, and enforcement. Another officer, while not in the school full-time, works with the schools and students on public safety issues. In our records section, we have 1.5 FTE employees. We also have 2 to 0.5 FTE employees who work in code enforcement. We currently have 1 volunteer reserve officer. Our goal is to have 5 to 10 reserve officers. We also have 5 cadet officers, which are citizens aged 15 to 21 who want to find out more about law enforcement. They participate in regular monthly trainings on police skills and topics, as well as being able to participate in the regular police department monthly trainings. They also help with events and police investigations whenever possible. We have recently used them on several large-scale investigations where they help with documenting and tracking of officers at a crime scene. This past year, we have accomplished many different things we set out to do. We updated and continued the implementation of our equipment replacement program, which included the replacement of some of our body cams, tasers, and radios, a major upgrade of our firearms training range, and 2 new replacement vehicles. We worked to improve our traffic safety program by sending an officer to the motor officer training school. That officer has been using traffic data collected from different streets around town to address problem areas. We recently expanded our Coffee with a Cop program to include Cocoa with a Cop to reach out and connect with kids. We also continued to hosting a mock trial with the middle school's social studies classes. This past year, Gretel was found guilty of murdering Hansel. These were very successful programs. We plan to continue with them. A very important implementation was to teach the I Love You Guys curriculum to the school to standardize the school response to emergencies and threats. Presentations were given and information was sent out to parents on the emergency process. This system has been utilized several times since implementing to prevent problems. One of our officers was even able to help develop part of the national curriculum for this system. We continued to improve on our code enforcement this year to improve livability of the community by dealing with vegetation, junk, and abandoned vehicles. This next year, we plan to improve on efficiencies in dealing with the code enforcement issues. One of the goals of the police department has been to improve the emergency management response for the city. This is also now a council goal. This past year, we started the process of updating the emergency operations plan. To do this, we invited our community and government partners and have been meeting monthly to update the plan. This past year, our officers have done an exceptional job of investigating some very lengthy and large cases, resulting in several arrests and convictions. Some of these include the fatal house fire in Washington Street, several large abuse cases, one of which resulted in a 53-year sentence, and a major drug house issue. Brody, our drug canine, has been very active and effective as well. He has found several large quantities of drugs while working with the DEA on cases with Stayton ties. The numbers that you see are lower this year for a couple of reasons. This past year, we changed our method of calculating the numbers. In the past, our criminal offense calculation included all incidents the officers investigated, even those that were not criminal in nature. The current numbers include only the crimes. I believe this is a more accurate representation of the crimes investigated versus non-criminal police activity. We have also noticed a decrease in person-to-person crimes this past year. Another reason our numbers are low are due to staffing. This past year, we were down 2 officers due to attrition to larger agencies and a third who was out 6 months with an injury. While all reported crimes are still investigated, we have less officers. The amount of self-initiated calls drops. This coming year, we plan to continue to prevent and target crime by using data collected from our crime statistics and our traffic studies. We'll be recruiting to build up our reserves. Our previous reserves were hired by other agencies, and we plan to increase the number in the near future. The reserves are very vital to what we do as they assist the officers on patrols, investigations, and events in the community. It is also a great way for them to see if law enforcement is a good fit as a career for them. While we don't currently have an officer assigned to the school full-time, we do connect with the students whenever possible. The plan for this coming year is to continue to participate in school functions, assist with school safety presentations, work with troubled teens through peer court, participate in school threat assessments, as well as being present on school campuses when able to do so. For the last 2 years, we have been participating with 13 other local agencies headed by the Salem Police to replace an obsolete records management system. This is a large project that can take multiple years to complete. The hope is this system will be fully implemented by the end of this year. We currently use Metcom as our 911 center located in Woodburn. This is an ORS 190 organization, meaning it is owned by every agency that participates in it. The radio system we all use to communicate between the dispatch center and other officers is very outdated and need of replacement. The plan is to start the process of replacing the radio system this year through Metcom. As in previous years, we will continue to replace equipment gradually that wears out, such as body cams, tasers, firearms, computers, and vehicles. This year, we have added a line item in non-departmental to assist with revamping our emergency management program. Partnering with Public Works, we will work to put together our emergency operations center here at the community center, starting with items such as the radio system and computers. We hope to secure a generator for the Emergency Operations Center through a grant that we recently applied for. We will also continue updating the emergency operations plan as stated earlier. Once the plan is updated, we will conduct trainings based on the plan. There are a couple major changes to the budget this year. The first one is due to the rising costs in the PERS retirement system. The department will need to reduce our number of full-time sworn officer positions from 13 to 12. By doing this now, we hopefully can stabilize our PERS payments to help prevent a loss of more officers in the future. As stated, there's an increase to the 911 cost to pay for the radio system upgrade. While not a change from previous budgets, we will continue to replace police vehicles and equipment and prevent the need to purchase large quantities of equipment in large chunks. Do you have any questions, unless you want to wait till the very end?
Do any committee members have a question for Chief Stevens? Counselor Hook, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Patty. Chief Stevens, I'm curious about the overtime that has been more than what was budgeted for this last year.
For this last year, that was because of our being short-staffed. We were down the 2 officers, and we were down another officer because of an injury, and then we had 2 officers that were in the academy, and several major incidents that used up our overtime.
I see. All right, and so then the salaries were less than what was budgeted? Okay,
Correct.
got it, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Chief, what explains Metcom not gradually upgrading that system rather than waiting and let's do it?
Let's do it. It's a lot of it's because of the major costs. When you upgrade a system like that, in order to switch over from a what we call a VHS system over to a digital system, or it's a VHS simulcast system is what we're actually looking for.
Okay.
It's not something that you can just kind of gradually piece together.
Oh.
This system is actually an $850,000 system, and it's the lowest of what
Okay.
really can be in there.
All right, good, thank you.
That's how much the new system will cost?
Yes. And that's actually on the low end. Most of the digital, then that's to switch to what's called a VHF simulcast system. What really needs to be in place is a full digital system, which is millions of dollars to put in a system countywide.
So we're buying a system that'll be obsolete in a few years?
No, VHF will actually probably never be obsolete, thankfully, or analog. It's just a different style.
Does anyone else have questions for Chief Stevens? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm just wondering, you were talking about the system countywide. Is there a way we can partner with the county to help reduce our costs?
That's something actually that's being looked at. There's 2 911 centers in Marion County. There's Willamette Valley 911, and then there's Metcom. And there's some very serious talks going on about consolidating both dispatch centers together. And then there's also talk of combining the 2 radio systems together as well, and partnering with Marion County to piggyback on theirs. And so that's part of that whole process.
Thank you, Ms. Dominguez. Chief, just to follow up on that question, is there any date in mind that's projected for that kind of partnership to occur between the county and Willamette Valley and such?
Well, I say they're very serious about it. It's the preliminary talks are happening, and as right now, there's a plan set up that to go to it. They have the governance body designed of what it would look like, and right now it's just getting everybody on board to make that happen. If everybody agrees to it and votes on it and approves it, they could probably get it done within a couple of years. If there's some dragging of feet, then it's however long. Part of the big issue is that the city of Salem owns WVCC, and they own the whole dispatch center, and then users just pay into them, and they would have to give up their whole system, and it would have to become an ORS 190 for that to happen. So they have to give up a lot of personal rights in order to do that. So,
all right, very good, thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Chief Stevens? All right, hearing none, we'll continue. Mr. Fleischman, I assume?
Thank you. Good evening. So the issues that the Planning and Development Department are working on are continuation of downtown revitalization efforts, looking at promoting development in the Wilco Road industrial area. As was mentioned in the earlier presentation, this past year there was an allocation of money to hire consultants to work on economic development strategies. That effort is wrapping up, will be done this year, and we have requested funding in next year's budget for implementing those strategies and continuing to work on housing. This past year, the council established a housing and neighborhood vitality advisory commission. That group has now met twice. I am working with the Planning Commission on some code amendments that will bring our code into compliance with statutory requirements, which today it is not, and secondly, look at the whole way that our residential zoning is structured and where we go with that, with the idea of promoting greater housing choice and greater housing affordability. In this past year, there were 17 land use applications filed with the Planning Department and 6 city-initiated files, which was a substantial increase from the year before. And so far in the first 4 months of this calendar year, we've had 5 land use applications and 4 city-initiated files. So I think that we will continue to see an increased level of interest in development or other land use applications throughout this next fiscal year as well. I think that I may have sat here a year ago and talked about a couple of potential large developments that were on the horizon at that time. It now appears that neither of those will be going forward for various reasons that I don't think the city had anything to do with. But so there are no large or known substantial developments on the horizon at this point in time, but I think we'll continue to see a steady flow of applications before the city. As far as the department's budget is concerned, there is no change in personnel services. I am the department, and there is a transfer of funds to the Public Works Department to pay for a portion of the administrative assistant that also serves the Planning Department. Contract service funds are decreased from this previous year because this This year, we had the Economic Development Strategy Project, and this coming year, we're requesting $65,000 to work on implementing those strategies. This past year, the neighborhood grants were part of the planning department budget, and in this coming year, they are moved to the city council. As was noted, this past year, there was $5,000, and now it's proposed to be $20,000 plus $4,000 for revitalized downtown Stayton. I do want to clarify some of the remarks that were made at the public hearing and to amplify what Andy said afterwards. Please do not confuse the neighborhood grants, which is an expenditure of the city, with the Community Development Block Grant Program, which is a grant that the city received from the state of Oregon of federal money. That $400,000 grant, of which we project about $200,000 will be spent this fiscal year, the remainder is budgeted for next fiscal year. That money is obligated by contract with the state to be spent on housing rehabilitation programs. This, just so you know, for many years the city has had a housing rehabilitation program that has made low interest, no payment loans to income qualified homeowners. This grant for this year is providing grants to the owners of manufactured housing units in the 3 mobile home parks in the city. And so far we have spent about $100,000 of that $400,000. We got going pretty quickly once we got the paperwork all done, and then we hit a new state requirement that before any work is done in any home that was built more than about 15 years ago, you have to do a asbestos inspection. And there are few asbestos inspectors available to do those inspections, so that has really slowed down getting that work done once we were made aware of that requirement. So anyway, that's the summary of the planning department budget, and I'll answer any questions that you may have.
So to clarify, that $400,000, we're getting $200 this year, $200 next year, can only be spent on revitalizing mobile homes in the 3 parks.
Correct.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Does it,
technically, any manufactured home that the owner of the home does not own the land
Okay.
that it sits on. But, so that means the 3 parks,
Yeah.
in essence.
any more questions, Mr. Cranston? Okay, great.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Fleischman? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed.
I'll go ahead and save Lance the trouble of getting up to talk
Thank
about
you,
the
Mr.
community
Campbell.
center. The community center is rented for dances, wedding, receptions, parties, quinceañeras, meetings, and other events. We do host the senior meal program that's served here. Last year it was rented out for 1,171 hours, and it's managed by the Public Works and supported by the Public Works Administration. There's no real noted spending or changes, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about the community center. That is part of the plan we've talked about for the needs assessment to include the community center as part of that needs assessment going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Does anyone have questions regarding the community center? All right, go ahead, Mr. Cranston. Thank you.
Is that the rented hours, is that an up or down usage?
I believe that is
Okay.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Councilor Ort.
Does any of the money that, I don't know, I guess not very much, but does the money that is made from the rentals go towards the community center, or does it just go into a general fund?
There's not much money that we actually receive from the rentals.
Yeah, the rental income is in the $20,000 range, plus or minus, and your program's costing $59,000 to $60,000.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay.
but they're both accounted for within the general fund. So effectively, this operation subsidized by other dollars by about $2 to 1.
Gotcha. Can I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I know that I don't even know how to word this question, but I know that we've kind of talked about this before in terms of like capital improvements or having money set aside for that. And we don't have any money in this budget for that, but are there any issues with the community center that we foresee that we're going to need to, we've kind of touched on that a little bit, I feel like. But is that something that we need to, these things that we need to consider?
I think, what the goal would be the needs assessment to look at the space in the building and how it's being used and what the long-term vision of the space would be. It has remained essentially unchanged since it opened in 1979. Hank was here, he might remember exactly when it was, but 78, 79, somewhere in that time frame.
40 years ago this month, I dedicated this building.
So, it's looking at the use of it and the long-term use and what would be the best overall facility for the community. And is this it? And if so, what we do with that? And if not, what changes do we need to make going forward in terms of community center? So I'd hope the needs assessment would address some of those questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Dominguez.
Since you led into the needs assessment, I just had a question about that amount, the $100,000 that we want to set aside for that assessment. Can you explain a little bit about how those funds would be used? I know you also mentioned in here it's for the community center and the pool.
Yeah, it's come up in a different portion of the budget, but since the question is being asked now, what we have budgeted is a plan to do a needs assessment in terms of all of our spaces and to look at them and to give an idea of, we've talked about the pool and the community center are both sort of hitting the end of their life cycles and what would be the best progress forward with that. We've been working and thinking about a new city hall. We've been paying rent to establish funds to maybe afford or make a payment towards a down payment or have funds towards the start of a city hall. So it'd be looking at all of that and looking at the long-term needs of the city are and having a consultant come in and review that, those components and to make recommendations to the city that we could then use to bring forward with plans and actions of how we would address those concerns.
Just a quick follow-up. So the amount that we have in here, the $100,000, that is just for the assessment?
That's correct. That's what we've estimated the cost would be to hire a consultant to come in and do that needs assessment for those facilities.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions? All right, moving on. Municipal court.
So I'll handle the municipal court as well. The court is handled through a half-time position with the court clerk that's also shared with the police department, and then we have a municipal judge who is contracted. So that's the staffing. It remains unchanged. One of the factors of our budget has been to focus on performance measures. We're highlighting those, at least in my portions of the budget for sure. I know different departments are as well. These are important factors as we move forward in looking at having actionable and meaningful performance measures that help us determine the services that we're receiving and, if you will, for a term, the bang for the buck that we're receiving as well. So this is what we have so far for the performance measures for municipal court. It is in your budget, but I wanted to highlight some of the activities that they've been doing and work that the court had been doing. The budget remains essentially unchanged from last year. It's a pretty steady operation at this point. We took over the court a few years ago. I think we found the rhythm, and the court's been, I think, successful for the city and has served us well. And at this point, we do have a better feel for the cost of operating and maintaining our court system. And with that, I'll happy answer your questions about the municipal court.
Does anyone have questions regarding the municipal court? Okay. Mr. Cranston, go ahead.
It says here that the court will process an estimated $140,000. How much of that goes to the city? How much of that goes to state, county?
That's a great question. And yeah, the $140,000 is actually the city portion only.
Okay.
yeah, you can about double that as it relates to what ends up going elsewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Cranston. Does anyone else have questions? Okay, we'll move on to governing body.
So this is actually falling under the administration portion of it, but we're going to go ahead and break it out to the governing body. The budget proposes, again, $6,000 in expenses to allow for each member of the governing body to attend trainings and conferences as they see fit. So it's $1,000 per member of the governing body. As per the goals that were set, we have, and it's been talked about numerous times this evening, we have recommended expanding the community neighborhood grant program to $20,000. In addition, we've included $4,000 for a joint project with RDS for planters, trash cans, and bike racks in the downtown. The proposal that I think has garnered some questions is a proposal for a monthly stipend for $100 for each council member and $125 for the mayor to cover de minimis expenses related to performance of job duties. So this was based off of looking at the activities of a council member, the travel, potentially childcare, the wear and tear and use of your own personal equipment that normally would be de minimis type expenses but are real expenses that you incur. Obviously with this kind of stipend, the idea isn't that you're going to get rich by any stretch of the imagination, but it was to account for and cover for those expenses that you incur as part of your just natural duties. It's just a proposal, and talking with and thinking about this, I just thought it was worthy, and I know a lot of times with those small expenses, they're not worthy of putting out there, but there is wear and tear. There is, for using your car, for using your phone, for using your computer, and then for the other factors of driving into Salem to attend meetings and things like that, where you may not, come in and cover the cost, but this would just be something that would naturally cover those sort of expenses that are minimal. So it is just a proposal, but that's the thinking behind it and why we included it in this budget.
Councilor Hook, I believe you had some questions about this.
Yes, thank you, Chair Patty. Keith, I have a question about, is there a way, I'm not opposed to this, but also if we're going to have something like this, there should be some type of, I feel like there should be some type of, like if you can't attend the regular meetings, if you miss a regular meeting, like one of the two that are required, that like you have to forego your stipend for that month, like some type of consequence, like if you're not going to do your job, you shouldn't be getting paid.
Fair enough. I mean, some cities do a per meeting fee as well. The thought process with this was as you attend meetings outside of normal council meetings. But that's definitely another way of doing it as well, is to say, we could do a per meeting stipend, if you will. So for
like regular meeting.
Right. If you attend a meeting, you get $25 or $50.
Yeah. And not necessarily, because I don't want it to be like, every executive session or, community meeting that you go to. Just like your regular meetings, first and third Monday or Tuesday if it's after a holiday.
Okay. That's
just an idea there.
So the budget here shows the changes that are proposed. In there, the neighborhood improvement grant would be the $24,000, the $7,500 for the stipend. We have some additional council expenses proposed in there as well, and then memberships are memberships of the city as a whole joins, such as the League of Oregon Cities.
Mr. Campbell,
Yeah.
I have a question about this. I was reading up about this because I was pretty curious as far as counselor stipends go, where we are as a community, and if this is the right move for us with our size and different other considerations fiscally. Is it more conducive to somebody from a lower income to be able to afford to be an elected official, go ahead and receive that kind of stipend and be able to pay for things like you mentioned, wear and tear on your car, childcare, that type of thing? Would you like to talk about that at all?
It really is up to the individual cities. Some larger cities pay, a higher stipend, if you will. It was on the listserv, so I'm part of the OCCMA, which is the Oregon City County Manager Association. They put it on the listserv. It really just depends. It's a city by city. I wouldn't say it's necessarily per size or location. In the valley is the coast. It really just depends on the city and what they deem. Again, I wouldn't say this was a lot of money by any stretch of the imagination. So I think you need to be considerate of that. The idea, again, was just to cover those incidental costs that sort of add up. So it's not a net negative in terms of not only your time, but there's other factors that come in.
Anyone else want to go ahead, and Councilor Hook?
Thank you, Chair Patty. So I really wanted to kind of bounce off of what Chair Patty was talking about, because I think that it is important going forward. You know, we have elections every 2 years for a few positions, and there really is a disparity when it comes to low-income people or people that, you know, don't have time off or don't have the support system to be able to run for office and be in office, especially when you're going to evening meetings. And so when you have children or a job that you have to request time off of, and it's like an hourly job where you don't have vacation time to compensate for that, and I'm not even speaking for myself because that's not the case for me, but in general, being able to have a true representation of your community and making it so that that tiny little bit that you're getting can pay for childcare. And I don't know if a stipend monthly necessarily is the answer, but even having a fund where if you have to incur a cost for childcare to come to a meeting, that there is that in the fund where you could then submit it to the city recorder and have that reimbursed to you, because it's important to have that representation and to not have wages be or money be the only barrier that's keeping you from running for office and serving your community. So I don't know if monthly stipend just automatically is the answer, but I also do like the idea of incentivizing people to actually show up for meetings as well.
Do you have any questions there, or just?
Yes, I do have a question.
All right.
So can we talk about that? And when do we talk about that?
Right now is the time you could talk about what you would like to do. If the proposal is something you'd like to see changed or to make sure you're comfortable with, now would be the time to make that. And if somebody would like to make any recommendations, they can make a proposal.
I believe Mr. Mayor had something. No?
Well, I have to be careful and not show too much enthusiasm for this, but yeah, it's a good thing. And on Councilor Hook's previous question about non-attendance, non-pay, if I were anywhere close to the Capitol building each day, I'd be curious about whether a bunch of Republican senators, are they getting paid? Or did that get resolved? Or is that still an ongoing thing? I don't know.
And as Andy pointed out too, I mean, one thing to consider is this is just authorizing the money to be there. If you want to talk about, you know, how that money is addressed, we can definitely talk about that too going forward. Not necessarily tonight. So, council rules would be a good time to even look at it. Sure.
But just to go ahead and stem off that, right now we're just talking about the allocation of the funding if we choose to incorporate that in council rules.
Sure. And I guess at this point, if the budget passes and you decide not to take advantage of that money, then the money will be unspent, right?
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Ward.
So just as a clarifying question, so you're talking about not necessarily the money obviously isn't, like you said, a lot of money, but it's not necessarily to compensate for our time in our monthly meetings, but it's for those meetings where we're going to, like, the commissioner breakfast or to
Salem for Housing meeting.
yeah, like other meetings outside of like our council meetings, to where those are extra, because we talked about those extra responsibilities or things to where, and you're talking about to maybe make that a little bit easier on council members. Am I correct in that thinking?
Yeah, that absolutely was part of the thinking. The thinking too was the original conversation, I think, started with, you know, the new council coming on and the child care issue that, you know, could be an issue as well. So, but as we started talking about it even further, it's those other costs as you're driving to Salem to attend a housing meeting, as you're driving to attend another meeting, as you're using your personal phone, your personal computer for phone calls, for emails, for the work that you do in preparation. I think all those things would be what the goal would be to sort of cover, to make sure that you're not incurring all of those costs to serve. But at the same time, to make sure that, $60, $100 a month, after taxes, $60 is probably what you're going to bring home. So it's not like it's a lot of money.
Mr. Petty.
Go ahead, Councilor Quicken.
To start with, it's just a placeholder as an idea to discuss. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is the amount of time and effort that goes into the council. It's not just going to the meetings on the first and third Monday of the month, especially depending on what representation and what role you serve on the council. An insignificant amount of money. I don't need it. However, having it there to cover incidentals, I think it could afford the opportunity for some folks to just cover the cost of spending that time away from their family, from their job, whatnot. I'll give you an example how much time that we spend, I myself spend on the council, depending on what's taking place at City Hall. It's a secondary job for me, and I already work 60 hours a week. So again, I don't need the money, but I think the way it's designed to cover for what our folks are asked of, it's pretty insignificant.
That's a great point. I figure we can probably flesh this out a little bit more when we discuss council rules. So does anybody else have any other questions as it pertains to? Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Hawk.
Thank you, Chair Patty. I was curious, it was a clarifying question. When you're talking about driving to other meetings, Keith, in Salem, you're talking about like just the wear and tear, because you can already ask for reimbursement for like mileage under the council expenses, correct?
You can, but the issue
And no
would
one
be-
does, but
no one does, right? I mean, that's the reality is we don't see those come in. So, if you have to drive to Sublimity for something, or if you have to go meet a constituent, those are the things you're putting miles on your car. It's all sort of incidental. I know personally for me, if it's less than 10 miles, I don't care, but because my time's worth more than that small amount. But, at the same time, those all add up over time, right?
One more?
Yes, sorry.
Go ahead, Councilor Hook.
Keith, can you explain a little bit of the thinking of why only the mayor's position was the one that was more versus mayor and council president?
I guess I hate to say I'm doing an appeal to tradition there, but that's an appeal to tradition. Normally the mayors are paid slightly more than the rest of the council. So traditionally that's what you see. So that's what I went with. But it's a terrible argument. So I'm not just going to defend it other than to say that's what I based it off of, that's what you normally see.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this issue?
One more.
Okay, Councilor Hook
I'm
has
so
one more.
sorry. I just wanted to clarify that what we're doing tonight, if we put this into the budget, it is just a placeholder in the budget. We are not committing to spending this money in any way.
Would that be correct, Mr. Campbell?
That would be correct. We can definitely come up with a
Correct.
policy of how you want to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll have that discussion a different day, it sounds like. All right. You want to go ahead and proceed, or do we have more questions? Okay.
So just wanted to highlight the general budget numbers that are already included in the budget. So we're just highlighting these. We do have some additions we're going to talk about in proposed budget. So again, we talk about performance measures. From an administrative point of view, these are the measures that we use, the meetings, the special sessions, the resolutions, and the ordinances adopted. Again, whether these are the best measures is something I think would be worthy of having more discussions on. Part of what we're trying to do is to look about our outreach and how we're communicating with different portions of the community. So we have begun tracking YouTube, Facebook likes we've been doing for a little while, social media posts, and unique visits to our homepage, just basing it off our homepage only as what we're measuring. But All of these things are different tools to try to see how we are in communicating with the city and what tools we have that are successful in reaching different components of our city. Public records requests, I think, are important to point out the number of public records requests we do receive and how much time we are spending on those, and then the number of new hires and orientations. And we have seen that go up quite a bit with the pool. That is our big orientation and hires. And that's really striking when you look at 16, 17, and then when we took over the pool, as you can see that the numbers really jump. From a finance point of view, these are the different components of completing the budget: accurate reporting, financial reports, clean opinions from the auditors. These are all the things that are measurable in terms of being effective from a financial administrative point of view. And this is just kind of a general activity of what the office is doing in terms of vendor checks, employees checks, and accounts that we bill just over time. There is no proposed changes to the staffing. This is the staffing that's been consistent for the last few years. So one of the agreements we made with their ASME and was part of our study that we did with McGrath was to do fund a health and wellness program. So we have $6,000 budget for that. There is funding of $35,000 for an executive recruitment, funding of $12,000 for a police needs assessment, and funding of $10,000 for a community branding study, which is part of the council goals. So we've talked about these several times, but I think it's important. Part of the budget is to make sure that we are meeting and addressing the council goals. So I've just highlighted again in this slide, I'm not going to go through all of them, the different funding that's in place and where that funding is and what its goal that it's attempting to successfully complete is related to. Other highlights, emergency management funding. I think we'll talk about this for non-departmental, and I'll let some other people handle this. I'll handle this. Why not? So one of the goals was to fund emergency management funding. We have $20,000 budget for that. We've talked about the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, sustainable funding transfers to parks, libraries, and pools. So we make transfers to help cover the ongoing costs associated with those additional items. So we have the addition of the emergency management, and there's no city retirement plan UAL funding for 2020. So Andy talked about that earlier. That was done in the last fiscal year. Streetlights. We talk about streetlights every year. There's a small increase for the streetlight fees to cover the new development and increase in utility rates. There is the LED street light replacement program. LED lights are still costly individually, but if we could take advantage of grants or other opportunities in the long term, that would be a cost savings. There has been a adopted streetlight fee, but it has never been enacted. So the streetlights are covered by general fund dollars. So if you wanted to try to free up general fund dollars, we could look to enact that streetlight fee.
Council, question?
I'm sorry, who would pay the streetlight fee?
It would be a fee that would be associated with the utility bill.
Okay.
Is what would be in place. And I don't remember exactly how long ago the council adopted that.
It's been long.
It's been, yeah,
Long
many moon have passed. So every year, I think since I've been here, we've highlighted that there has been a fee adopted, but it's never been implemented.
Like how much would that look like? If I'm just saying if it was.
Streetlights were 116,000. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head here. 61. Let me get the right
Yeah, the
figure.
street fee itself generates right around $90,000 at $2 per residence or per account. So it'd be in that order of magnitude, sort of $45,000 per dollar of fee assessed.
Just wondering.
And I think the street lighting is what, around $115,000, so you would need if you wanted to offset the entire cost of the program, you'd need a fee of around $2.50.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Council Quigley.
Back to one slide, if we could, or sorry, 2 slides. I'm concerned about the $47,000 in the water fund to find a secondary option. I think that should be increased. I don't know where from yet. I think we should really look at that. This community does not have a secondary water source at the moment. Should something take place with our original water source, we are going to be up a creek. So I'd like to see that increased in order to find another water source.
I'll speak to that. Brian, that's really just for a consultant, hiring a consultant to help us locate a secondary water source. That is not for the construction or any kind of feasibility.
Okay, so that's sufficient?
I believe it is for a consultant to come in.
Okay, and we won't know until we put bids out, or?
I will not know until I put bids out.
Okay, all right, so just make note for the record for myself, please.
I'd be more than happy to increase that if you'd like that.
If you think it's sufficient, that's great.
Mr. Mayor, you had a question?
Mr. Ledwick, what's the history of trying to find secondary water sources in this town? Do you know? I mean,
I've heard that they've tried in the past.
Can you come to the...
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's see if I can answer this. There has been numerous attempts in the past with different wells that have been attempted to be found near where our water plant is, up and down the park range area there. I've seen maps of quite a few that were done. We also looked, I think, up towards Pine Street as well at one point. So we have had challenges finding secondary water sources that would be sufficient to add cover. So Lance, cover from there, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ludwig.
The secondary water source testing that the city went through a few years ago really focused on water galleries down along the North Santiam River. There was an entire report done on that. There's possibilities that you can maybe be able to draw water out of that. I wouldn't be focusing on there with this. I'd be focusing along the Mill Creek corridor, wells.
Okay.
But I wouldn't eliminate that. I mean, the city of Salem, that's how they produce water. They have a water gallery right along the North Santiam River. Their situation is a little different than ours. They're actually on an island. We're not. So they're surrounded by water. Water table's a lot higher there. So I guess what I'm saying is that we've explored different opportunities in the past. We haven't found anything that was credible enough that we went forward with. I'm hoping to find something different. We really need something different.
Hence my question.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Hook, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Patty. It is for you, Lance. Sorry. Just
I gotta get my
a
steps
You're welcome. Clarifying question: the $47,000. You have have you done research on how much a good consultant would be to find magical secondary water? And is $47,000 enough?
Speaking as a former consultant, it's never enough. I'm hoping that would be the case. It's an educated guess.
Okay.
At this point. That's what I can say. So when I responded to Councilman Quigley saying we could budget more for it, I'd be more than happy to do that to cover my rear end. But I thought, in looking at the budget, that would be sufficient.
Okay, Mr. Ludwig, don't we have money in a contingency fund in case it does cost more?
We do, and this would be correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Parks, but this would be an SDC project as well. So we could transfer money out of SDCs, theoretically, because it's due to growth. But I'll let Mr. Parks maybe respond.
Mr. Parks, thank you.
It's not much different than a master plan, correct?
We probably would need to make a minor change to the ordinance that ultimately adopted the SDC fee and just make sure that the secondary water source is a component of the fee methodology. With that, yeah, I'm fairly confident you'd be able to wrap it into SDCs.
The secondary water source is part of the master plan, and the water master plan. It's just a matter of how much of a percentage of that plan is dedicated towards growth. And that's, I believe, what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing is relates to the amount of money to include in the budget for this particular item. As a consultant, I mean, if your budget was 80,000, I'm suggesting to you it'd probably cost you 80,000. If your budget is 47,000, there's a much better chance it'll be closer to 47 than 80.
Right.
The one thing I would like to point out also, this is for the fiscal year 1920. I'd probably start looking at putting this out to bid around the new year. So if we spend $47,000 in the first 6 months exploring that, we can always budget for an additional fund for the next fiscal year to find that.
It's an excellent idea. Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Ludwig before we continue? All right, thank you.
Chair Patty.
Councilor Hook.
I have a question not regarding, I don't think it's regarding anything that Lance would speak about, but it's the street.
That's good because he sat down.
I know, but the street fee. is-
Okay.
I wanted to ask questions about.
Okay, let's hear it.
Would now be the time when we talk about if we did implement that street fee that was already approved, like a timing for implementation, like a percentage of that over time that we would increase it, or is that kind of into the weeds?
You're talking about the streetlights?
Yeah, sorry, streetlights, yes, thank you. The $2.50 increase that Mr. Parks was talking about.
I think it, can be something that, at this point, if this group would like to see us come back with a proposal for, or to talk about, I mean, we bring it up just to make you aware. So it's definitely something that, if you're interested in pursuing, we could bring it forward and talk about what that would mean and how that would impact going forward.
Yeah, but you have complete flexibility, as I understand, in the existing authority to levy up to the full amount of the program cost. So with that, if you wanted to do it 10% a year, 50% a year, all at once, that really is up to you, and flexibility is there, and just need to decide what you wanted to do. Bottom line number as relates to if you did full implementation, let's say at $2.50 per home, it's going to be a little over 2.5% increase on the typical monthly residential bill. It would be a one-time hit that then would increase slightly going forward.
I believe Mr. Mayor had a question as well.
A comment, really. I can very well remember a young mayor 40 years ago who was way more full of himself than he is now, and who got this thing passed, and it was the most roundly hated program in the city. That streetlight fee just incensed people. But that was 40 years ago. They might just, okay.
What was the cost of the citizen at that time?
A couple of dollars.
Yeah. Okay.
But people hated that, and council finally didn't levy it anymore. It's still on the books, but it wasn't used. Would be something for somebody here to try to forget if he could.
Councilor Hook.
Thank you, Chair Patty. I more have like a comment. I would feel much more comfortable talking about this while we have citizen members, because I think that it's really important to hear their input on it as well, and not leave that just to the council to decide something like that, especially the implementation of it, if we're to walk down that path.
Yep.
Chair Patty?
Councilor Ward.
Oh my gosh, I forgot my question. Yes, okay. How many other cities of our size have a street fee? Do you know that? I mean, is it a typical thing that people have that on there?
I honestly don't know, but I think Andy might be able to answer that.
There are very few cities that have a street lighting type of fee, and there's a vast number of cities that have implemented a street fee, in which you do have a street fee.
Yes.
Another avenue, no pun intended, would be to move the dollars for street lighting to the street fund and pay for that with the existing street fee, and gradually increase that street fee to be paying for that program without impacting your street maintenance. So there's a variety of different ways to ultimately get, where I think I'm understanding you to be going, which is, I think as Mr. Campbell mentioned, the nature of that fee was to, if you wanted to free up more dollars in the general fund for other purposes beyond what is currently being used to pay for street lighting.
I don't know that I necessarily care for it. I'm just asking the questions. So thank you.
Counselor Hook.
Thank you, Chair Patty. So if I'm understanding this correctly, right now, we are paying out of general fund for street lighting instead of having it come out of some type of street fund.
Yeah, there's two general ways you would see this done. One is in the general fund, and the argument for that would be the utilities, primarily, say, a PGE is paying franchise fees for the use of the right-of-way. And those franchise fees, in effect, are offsetting the cost of the street lighting program. So that's a very valid, rational nexus between the use, the receipt of dollars and the use of those dollars for public purposes. And another way to do that would be in a street fund, transportation fund, that deals with street right-of-way, street maintenance, and so forth, and has a street fee that pays for street maintenance, street lighting, street anything, street right-of-way maintenance, such as landscape medians and so forth, so landscaping, and sidewalks, and all of that. So it's really, just developing what is the rational nexus between the dollars coming in and how you ultimately want to spend them. Or conversely would be, here's what we want to end up with. How do we pay for it? And then there's this whole menu of different revenue sources that you can use to ultimately pay for it. And I think I've just highlighted what I see as the two primary ways that street lighting ultimately gets funded within a city environment in Oregon.
So follow-up question. It's currently coming out of general fund, and if it came out of some type of street fund, that would go on to the utility bill. Is that what we're talking about here? I want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, if you move the $115,000 out of the general fund into the street fund and brought no money with it, you would effectively be reducing the monies that you have in the street fund by $115,000 that would be used for paving, street maintenance, and so forth to pay for street lighting. That may or may not be something you want to do. If you brought the expenditure over into the street fund and said, well, let's go ahead and take the existing street fee and just increase it up incrementally so that we're making the street fund neutral, and from a financial standpoint, you'd be raising that existing street fee by around $2.50, right? So there's a couple different ways to do it. One way is to not have an extra fee on the bill. It's to take your existing street fee and just incrementally increase it, versus implementing a street lighting fee, which would be yet another line on the bill. If you're wanting to generate new money.
Counselor Quigley.
So today, just to clarification, the street lighting fund is not used for anything, correct?
The street lighting in the budget, the $115,000, is that what we're referring to, Counselor?
The fee itself, the street
There
lighting.
is no fee.
Correct.
No fee, so it's
Correct.
generating no money. Right.
Correct. So two observations. I think this came up during the ordinance, the 1019 ordinance. We brought that up, and we asked specifically who owns the streetlights downtown, to which it was PPL or Nibley, right? Pacific Power.
I don't recall.
That's what, I think that's what it was, right? So I guess what I want a clarification on, if you're asking us, here's this option for us, the $259 or whatever it is, additional streetlight fee from that fund, we can use that only specifically for streetlights, or we can use it as the council chooses, if we were to implement it.
My understanding on the 259, the fee for street lighting.
Correct.
And I'd have to go back and read specifically the ordinance that created it, but generally when you create those types of fees, they're to pay for that specific
Correct.
program.
Correct.
And not to then generate additional money to go
Correct.
elsewhere.
Correct.
So you would be limited to generating about $115,000 worth of revenue out of that fee.
Gotcha.
Now, if you use the street fee, which is a completely separate animal, you don't have any such limitations, anything and everything probably covered in that.
Correct.
fee probably gives you wide berth in terms of, the uses of that, including street lighting, landscape maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, bike paths, the whole bit.
Made the correlation, got it. And that came up because of that 1019 discussion, that's my recollection. The last thing I'll say about this is, the last pulse I had on this was from 2010, and the mayor's right, I think from 40 years ago, you might have been the most hated man in the room, but at 2010, there was a distaste for it as well. So just an FYI for you guys, you can do what you want.
Good to know. Mr. Cranston, you had a question?
Clear back in the 80s, it was bad.
Go ahead,
How many
Mr.
of our
Cranston.
streets have streetlights? Because if I'm going to pay a streetlight fee and I don't have a streetlight on my street, I'm going to feel a little put out. I feel put out that I pay a $25 sewer fee and all of my water runs straight into the creek.
Mr. Campbell, do you have a response to that?
At one time, I did know how many streetlights there were, and I have a number in my head, but I'd be honest, I'd be guessing at this point. I have a number, but I can't say how accurate that would be.
But not all.
Still just trying to remember.
Does anyone else have any other questions regarding this matter? Councilor Ward?
I was just going to say, but not all the streets have a street light, right? I guess that's the whole point, is if you're going to pay for a street light.
We have a lovely map, but I don't know if I've ever looked at it in terms of, is there a street that doesn't have a street light, just other than just look at the pretty dots on the map, right?
Mrs. Dominguez?
Yes, I just have a quick clarifying question. So it was mentioned that the power company owns the streetlights?
That's correct. The city doesn't own any of our streetlights.
Okay, so what is the expenditure going to be that would offset those revenues?
We pay
How
100
would we spend that money?
Well, what we're saying is the streetlights, that the fees for the streetlights that we pay to Pacific Power is $115. We're proposed for $115,900 for next year. So that's.
Yes, but that's, what would the city use those fees to do if they're already, the streetlights are already owned by the power company? What cost is that to the city?
Electric bill.
Yeah,
it's
just the
just
city's
the electric
bill?
Yeah, it's electric bill and cost of rental of the lights.
The rental of the lights, okay. I just wanted some clarification.
Councilor Hook, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Patty. Clarifying question again. The $115,000 that we're paying to Pacific Power, that's something that the residents right now are only paying out of their general property taxes towards the city, just to pay for everything that the city runs. Like they're basically getting their street lights. Like if you own property, you're paying for street lights.
It's coming from our general fund dollars, yeah.
So if you don't own property, you're not paying for street lights.
I wouldn't say that's exactly.
Yeah, that wouldn't be accurate either. I think, the money that comes into the general fund comes from a variety of sources, including franchise fees.
Okay.
So if you're in the city and you're connected to cable, you have phone, you have electricity, natural gas, you're paying something that ultimately ends up to the city that is,
Got it.
Could be a portion of that ultimately paying for the streetlights as well.
Or
Thank
rent.
you for the clarification.
If you're paying rent to a landlord, the landlord's paying your property taxes are paying your general fund.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions regarding this? Okay. All right, moving right along.
Okay. So to wrap up, the general fund is your other requirements. There's two components of this. We budget 10% of the overall spending in the general fund to contingency, for unexpected events and so forth. The balance of funds in the unappropriated is around $600,000. That's the money that it would take more public meetings to ultimately appropriate those dollars for any type of purpose. The total between the two ends up being $1,074,000. That's 5.6 months worth of working capital within the general fund, which meets the financial policy goal of 5 months to have enough money in general fund so you're not having to borrow, waiting for property taxes to come in beginning in November. That's a slight decrease from the current, the fiscal 19 budget was 5.9 months, but we're also narrowing the budgeted reduction. Last year was a little over 300. This year it's about 240,000, and we would anticipate until there's a trend that shows otherwise, that the city would be operating fairly close to a break even in terms of money coming in, current versus current money going out. That's just with revenues exceeding expectations and expenditures being less than budget.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have questions regarding the other requirements? All right, great. Moving on to the library. Ms. Moser, take it away.
Good evening. So let's start with some highlights for the library. The library has approximately 55,000 physical items and provides access to over 2 million items through our partnership with the Chemeketa Cooperative Regional Library Service. We also provide access to 70,000 downloadable audiobooks, ebooks, and magazines. We provide cultural passes and access to online resources, including Learning Express, Ancestry.com, and Chilton's online. The library also provides programming for all ages. That includes story times, makerspace programs, do-it-yourself crafts, and summer reading for all ages. The Stayton Library also provides outreach story time to all kindergarten classes in our area. Some changes for this year include enhanced access to electronic resources through our participation with CCRLS. So this year we've been able to add some access. So we now are able to provide downloadable magazines through Overdrive, online arts and crafts classes through Creative Bug, streaming video through Canopy, and access to consumer reports online. We also continue to develop our library programming. So this year we've added a baby time, we've celebrated Star Wars Day, and we partnered with the Marion County Master Recyclers for an art and craft supply swap. Library funding, so in your budget this year, library funding includes $183,500 from the local option levy, a proposed transfer of $197,900 from the general fund, and $96,922 from CCRLS reimbursement. The library is fortunate to have the support of both the Stayton Friends of the Library and the Stayton Library Foundation. Last year, we received over $30,000 in support from those entities, and that does not include the funding of our outreach position. These are our library performance measures. They include a 10% increase in circulation of downloadable materials, a 3% increase in the circulation of physical materials, and a 3% increase in library visits. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Moser? All right, hearing none, go ahead and move on. Thank you so much. All right. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here tonight to present the budgets for the 11 individual funds that the Public Works Department is responsible for. Myself and the men and women of the Public Works Department strive to represent this city and the taxpayers of this city with the utmost respect. We have 16 employees in the Public Works Department. The city's budget is over $24 million, and of that $24 million, approximately 64% of that is from the Public Works Department. I take that responsibility personal, and I preach to my team to do the same. The Public Works team is on call 24/7, 365 for emergencies. And running the wastewater treatment plant and the water treatment plant, there are more calls in than you may realize. My Public Works teams are professionals, so I rarely have heard a complaint coming from them. They work late on weekends, weekend nights, just to come in and fix a problem. Before we started tonight, I just wanted to go on the record and saying that I'm proud of the Public Works Department and the work we do for the citizens of Stayton, trying to make life here a little better each day. And I hope you all feel the same. All right, moving on. The Parks Department. Staffing for the Parks Department goes unchanged, really. We have a .3 that was added for the seasonal worker. We had that last year. I'm not really sure why it's not 2.0 for last year as well, but we had a parks a summer helper last year at .3. The seasonal contract services is for mowing of the parks. Some of you may have seen that out there recently. They do a very good job for us, and it's very cost effective. The accomplishments this last year: mowed and cleared brush and blackberries from Riverfront Park. I'm hoping you guys get down there. The park is really taking shape. It looks real nice. It's a great addition to our community. We've installed a new refrigerator at the concession area over at Pioneer Park. Makes it really a full-service facility other than a stove. It can be used for just about any event, and in fact, we rent it out to weddings there. People have weddings there in the pavilion area. It's real nice. We also installed video cameras at Pioneer Park to help prevent vandalism. This last year, we had a few events that we've had vandals come in and they've completely wrecked the inside of the restrooms. So we had video cameras donated to the city, and we installed them on the outside in hopes of getting pictures of folks that may do that. We haven't had any luck recently, but the vandalism has gone down dramatically. We installed a new merry-go-round at the Pioneer Park. Last year, you may be well aware that we had to remove it because it was old and in need of replacement. It was unsafe, so we removed it. We received a lot of comments regarding that. But this year, we replaced it, and I was just out there today and saw 4 or 5 little kids on there, and they look to be having a great time. So it's been a great addition back to the park. We replaced the ADA ramp at the municipal courthouse. The wood ramp going up to the back stairs, we replaced that this last spring. The tennis courts are actually being resurfaced now. I met with the gentleman today. He was going to start. He actually went out and filled the cracks today in the tennis court. He needs 5 days of good weather. Unfortunately, he wasn't here last week, but he's going to be coming in the very near future once we get 5 days, and he's going to be resurfacing the tennis courts. And we installed chips in Westtown Park and the community center parks. The Westtown Park was part of the grant, the city grant program that we talked about. We did install engineered chips there, and we also went to the community center park. Strategic issues for the parks: continue to provide professional maintenance service to the Stayton parks. Prepare an OPRD grant application for Mill Creek Park, and find alternate grant opportunities for the Mill Creek Park. Long-term, continue to work to meet Riverfront Park Conservation Plan requirements. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of when we took on Riverfront Park, but we had to create a conservation plan, and in that plan there are requirements for the city to meet. As of up until the last 4 or 5 years ago, we weren't really doing a great job at doing that. We put more resources towards that. Park's really taken shape, and the state likes it, so we're going to continue doing that. We'd like to expand the city trails throughout the city per the trails plan. And long-term, we got to look for funding opportunities for the Mill Creek Park. The engineer's estimate for that park, if I recall, came in at like $4.5 million for all the amenities the city chose. The large OPRD grant is only good for like $750,000, so there's a shortage there. And granted, we can do this park in phases. We're still going to have to find alternate funding sources. Challenges, opportunities: providing enough staff and labor for the desired service levels, procuring land or easements for the trail system, and capitalize on volunteer groups to provide service. We have been taking advantage of the volunteer groups and some that aren't necessarily volunteers through law enforcement helping us out, but they do a good job. In fact, our community garden was rehabilitated and upgraded this last spring recently, and one of the gentlemen that was working there was one of those volunteers, and he did an outstanding job for us. Took pride in his work. Long-term, procuring land and easements for the trail system, that's very important. And securing sustainable funding for the desired parks and recreational services that the citizens here in the city would like. Changes, transferred funds from the Jordan Bridge repairs from Parks Fund back into the Facilities Fund. I'm not sure if you're aware, but for the last several years, we have budgeted $100,000 for the Jordan Bridge repairs. This last year, my office put out 2 contracts, RFPs for services. We did not receive one contractor to bid on that over the 2 times. So